inclusiveness. But it's got to be inclusiveness that's not just political. You see Afghanistan, a tiny country, absorbing a huge portion of the UK aid budget and many other things. So politics change this as well in really nasty ways. So it's really important that inclusiveness is based on inclusiveness to really try and uplift people and ensure that they have a potential rather than just the politics and the threats driving the inclusiveness, which I think is a danger.
Okay, I think we'll just do one more question, and we're going to have to wrap up then because we're running over.
Hi, you started off by saying independence was a bad thing, but then the rest of your...
Interdependence.
Yeah. But the rest of your presentation seemed to suggest that perhaps independence was a good thing in that it's prevented conflicts in the past. Perhaps it'll be an impetus to deal with pandemics, with climate change, with issues that face the whole world. You're preventing this one man as an island thing that I think perhaps we've got going on. Is interdependence not a good thing?
Yeah. Well, I guess and maybe this is just caught up in what we mean by things. In my mind, integration is sharing, and sharing where we can draw on what's good in others and what societies have to offer, and become a shared identity. For me, that's integration. Interdependence is when I really need, and if everything else, I need the power coming, I need the food coming, I need the water coming. I need it in a way that if anything happens there, I'm vulnerable, really vulnerable. Right. And it's how you have integration and the strength that comes out of it without the fragility that comes out of these more and more integrated systems. So yeah, I think integration is good. It's just we also have to worry about interdependence in a way that we don't have to worry, I think, to the same degree about integration.
Sure. Yeah. There's an aspect of dominance in interdependence.
Yeah. It's the same. One quick question from Eleanor, and then we
and I'm happy to stand around afterwards for a few minutes if people want to talk to me. And I know you had a question that you think I didn't answer.
The developed nations of today have understood that maintaining some forms of social protection allows capital to remain within their economies and thus helps to enhance them. However, structural adjustment initiatives and other World Bank-imposed policies have restricted developing countries from enjoying the same privileges that have helped today's rich countries to prosper in the past. When the last 3 decades of World Bank and IMF structural adjustment in the third world regions have only perpetuated economic deprivation and social instability, how can you seriously suggest that the development of poor nations is the World Bank's primary objective?
Okay, so I guess you want a quick answer. Well, firstly, I really think that in everything one has to understand that institutions are in a constant struggle and evolution. The World Bank did a lot of really terrible things and probably still does a lot of terrible things. But I think it would be a gross caricature to say that most people in the World Bank aren't committed to development, or that most of what the World Bank has done is not development-oriented. And the thing is, you've really got to speak to people in the countries. I mean, speak to them in the African countries, in China, wherever you want to speak to them, to ask what the World Bank's done. Terrible things, but also many good things. Now, the structural adjustment programs were 1970s and 1980s programs. By the time I got to the bank, structural adjustment was already very much in the history books. It was bad. It forced countries to do a lot of bad things, but it was basically what structural adjustment programs were is very much what you have in the UK economy today. Just cut, and cut a lot of good things that are really vital for societies. The UK is going through a structural adjustment program, and 30 years ago it would have been called a World Bank program. Now it's called a UK program. And many countries are. Greece is going through the same thing. And these things are disastrous, particularly for poor people, because you're cutting what the poor people depend on: public education, public health, welfare benefits, etc. So they greatly increase inequality. Now, why is the UK doing what it's doing today? And I'm certainly not going to be an apologist for this government, but it's doing it because basically it can't afford. Its debt is much too great. And that's what was behind a lot of the big mistakes of the structure. Now, the amazing thing about that period, when you look back on it, which countries have not got into debt crisis now? Why are emerging markets, developing countries, are all on average growing at 4 or 5 times the UK's rate? Africa is growing at 5% at the moment. It's growing at 3 times the UK's rate and has done for the last 10 years. So these people learned a really bitter lesson, which is never get yourself in that position again where you're going to depend on the World Bank or anyone else to tell you what to do. Get your macro house in order. Don't live well beyond your means and get yourself in shape on the economy front. And they've learned that lesson to amazing effect. So if it wasn't for them having learnt that lesson, we'd be much worse off. The average growth rate in the world this year is going to be something like 3%. And that's entirely due to developing countries' success in managing their own business without structural adjustment programs. So, to me, the amazing thing about the UK and the US and Europe is having lectured and forced the rest of the world to do what they're doing, do what they did then in the 80s on structural adjustment. They just completely forgot about it for themselves and thought, well, we just taught them it, we'll forget about it. And so they've gone up and completely screwed up these economies in a rather comprehensive way.
But hopefully there'll be some feedback from what's developing into the West.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll learn and we won't do the same thing in 20 years' time. But we got to get there first by trying to survive in this very, very hostile local environment.
Sure, I think that's a very fine point and distinction between integration and interdependence. I'm afraid we're going to have to
enjoy yourselves at the secret garden party.
But please,
that's absolutely fantastic.
Big thank you for Ian Goldin.
He wants to move there and people can chat. So you can be there.
If you're happy to talk to some people outside.
That's the problem with governments have signed something like 2,700 treaties come out of the Hague. 5% of them. So it's not a problem that there's no legal framework.
But I'm like, how do we get that?
Well, if you're a corporate lawyer, you make sure your corporate applies the rules.
But it's not enough just from it's very reactive. It's like your advisory, but at the end of the day, you don't.
Well, I think we need to name and shame. I mean, you need to. What I was part of at the World Bank is a big shaming of Woodford that forced him to resign. Exposing things.
So do you really think that is the only method?
It's the last resort because we all, when we join organisations, have confidentiality and other clauses, and it's not a good thing to publicly talk about your institution.
Like you're essentially
but if you feel that it's gone to a place where only that is going to deliver anything, and you feel strong, then you've got to do it. But it's dangerous, and you can go to jail for it.
And also you get segregated as well. But how do you inflict this change in like a more cohesive and coherent and harmonious manner, apart from having to be on the sideline as an outstander going like, I want this, I want that.
That's more or less my question, because this is schizophrenic, like, we got to do the citizen thing, and yet the governance.
Why can't the global institutions
I spent 4 years of my career after Oxford working for the UN Environment Programme. And I see the dynamics. There's a lot of guys like you that retire having been there and then say we've got to change it. I'm like, why didn't you do it on the inside?
No, but I mean, I do.
We did it in different. I mean, you change inside.
Wolfowitz is one story, but I mean the whole thing. You were in it a long time.
I can go through lots of stuff in the bank that I changed. I changed the lending rules.